Oh, okay, there we go. Wow, great turnout. I'm going to be respectful to everybody's time this evening. I've got young kids at home, and I know everybody has things to do. We have t-ball and softball and things like that. So it is 6, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jake Adams. I'm the Executive Director of the Carroll County Economic Development Corporation, and I think every one of us kind of have an idea why we're here. So a couple things I'm going to go over as we move along is a little bit about our organization. So we're kind of level set on who we are, what we do, what we're trying to do. Thank you. And then we're going to get into a little bit about the details of residential development in our community. And I will apologize, I haven't presented in like 6 months because of COVID, so I'm knocking a little bit of rust off. I want this session, I want this community meeting to be open to you. I want you to be able to provide input. I want you to be able to ask questions, and we're going to reserve plenty of time for that. And if we run out of time, we'll find another place to continue to have the discussion down the road. So don't feel like we have to cram this in, or if you don't get your question answered or get your thoughts in, that we don't have time for that. So this is a process that we're going to be working across the county with your community, and so there'll be plenty more chances. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, I'm going to try not to move because they're recording. And all right, so what are we? What is the Carroll County Economic Development Corporation? I get a lot of, do I work for the commissioners? Do I work for the towns? Who am I? And I think the most important thing is that the Economic Development Corporation here in Carroll County specifically is a private nonprofit corporation. So we're not a public entity. However, we do contract with the county, as you can see up there in the communities, to do economic development services for Carroll County. And wherever you might be from, most counties have maybe a different model. So Cass County, their local economic development organization is public. They work directly for the commissioners, same with White County. And so you're gonna find a different model in some communities, but right here in Carroll County, this is what we have, and it has worked for some time. Really, our main goals are, as listed, responding to site inquiries, assisting investors in a local navigating local regulation, which regulation is a good thing, right? So we want to make sure that our investments in our community know how to handle those, know how to work through them, and are accommodating to our community. Business attraction, workforce strategies, that's not our mission, but those are some of the things we spend a lot of time doing in the community. So I want to go on to the next slide. We'll kind of get into a little bit too on what we do and why we're here. So when I was hired on in January, the Economic Development Corporation put together a strategic plan. There's a lot of you in this room that maybe participated in that, provided input. And some of the things that come out of that, really the areas of emphasis fall within housing, broadband expansion, and community collaboration. And I joke, I have a board meeting in the morning that hopefully today checks off 2 of those, right? So we're really focused on housing and community collaboration. So that's why we wanted to get a group of folks together that are like-minded to be able to have a discussion about residential development in our community and maybe what it could look like. And so as you see up there, those are the 3 emphasis. It doesn't mean that I don't do all those other things. It just means right here, right now, for 2021, this is where we're at. So you go to the next slide. So what is the goal? Really, it's hard to summarize with residential development what our true goals are and the outcomes. I know that with TIF and all the tools we have to leverage residential development, some of the 3 areas where I'm really focused on is increasing residential investment. So if you're in this room and you've built a home in this community or you want to build homes in this community, this is an avenue, our organization is an avenue to get that done. It doesn't mean we have to be. We're not the end-all be-all, but certainly we want to increase that number, whether it's directly with us or not. The second piece of that is increasing the housing inventory for new and current residents. So ironically enough, what we've seen is as homes are being built in our community, and this is a small sample of what we've seen, is that most of the new homes being built are being occupied by our current residents within the community. Not every case, but what we're seeing is affluent families have the capability, are building homes and wanting to stay in our community. And our pre-existing home inventory is being occupied by people that are migrating for work or that want to get out of the metro areas and live in our community. So not every case, but just a sample size of what that looks like. So what that means to us is that when we're looking to grow our residential households, we've got to be able to make sure that we're appealing to our current residents that want to live here and continue to live here. And the second piece of that is to make sure we're attracting folks that want to come to our community and make it their home. And that kind of goes into the diversing part of it, making sure we have a diverse portfolio. We need to make sure if we're going to have a plan for residential development, which this should be the kickoff for, is that we have equitable solutions for everybody to live in our community, right? So we feel that there should be an opportunity for everybody to have a home in Carroll County, and so we need to be aware of what that is and how we provide those opportunities for them to get that. So, and there, like I said, there will be plenty of room for questions, so just let this wash over, and then we'll start getting into the meat of things as we go along. So that's the goal. We're going to go on to the next slide. What's going on around us? So less of a lecture, but to give you guys an idea, I've had the great opportunity to work throughout North Central Indiana, maybe for the last 5 years, in different roles. And one thing I can tell you is that there are some of the same challenges going on around us as we see in our community. I'm fortunate enough to be able to come back to where I live to do this work, but I can tell you there's communities all over Indiana that are having the same discussions on how do they grow their communities, how they build a strong tax base, and what plans are they using and tools are they using. So I use Lafayette for an example. So Lafayette has obviously seen a lot of growth over the last 10 years, and I just pulled this out, and it ranked number 2 on Forbes' 2018 list for the best small places for business and careers. They're 15 minutes away, and so why can't we be a part of that? Why can't we have a piece of that? It doesn't have to look like Lafayette, but how do we share in that vision of a great small place to live? I moved here because I wanted to live in a small town, and I don't want to be Lafayette, but I know that in order to grow, maintain our schools, public safety, all those things, we have to have a vibrant community that's moving in the right direction. So just more on Lafayette, just the fact that they are growing. They do have their challenges that we don't have. And how do we take advantage of that? How do we leverage those opportunities for Carroll County? So next slide. Look at Kokomo. I know the fabric of Kokomo pretty well, but I can tell you that just 2018 as well, tremendous growth. They're more growing on the employment side than Lafayette was growing on the population side, but both communities were ranking in the top in the nation in growth. And so they are 20 minutes east of us. How do we position ourselves to capitalize on the employment growth? Who are the people working there? What demographic are they? How do we get them in a position to where they want to live in Carroll County? And so that kind of, for us, sets the stage of if we're going to be in line with everybody else for housing development and residential growth, if that's where we want to be, how do we compete in the space, and how do we use our neighbors to our advantage? We want to work with Lafayette. We want to work with Kokomo. And how do we do that? So more of those discussions are going to happen. We plan on, as an organization, to continue to reach out to those folks and make sure that we are having an open door, an open line of communication with them as they meet their challenges, exceed their goals, so on and so forth. So that's kind of what's going on around us. Next, we're going to go with the lay of the land. All right, so a little bit of numbers here, so I don't want to challenge you. But if we're looking at just the distribution of Carroll County residents, and I've presented this slide hundreds of times over again for different communities, but this is the top 5 counties sending workers into Carroll County. And so if you didn't know this, if you already knew it, I'm sorry, but we're doing all this to kind of get a nice even starting point for everybody. It's really not surprising in that aspect, but what that tells me when I get up in the morning is that there are 1,300 people that wake up every morning and come to our community to work within our schools, within our employers. It may be you. So that 1,300 people are definitely those are folks that we want to talk to about what kind of housing, what would get you the opportunity, what kind of opportunity would you need to be able to move into our community, right? And I think as employment grows, that number is only going to grow. So that's something that we're looking at as an organization, as well as where are they going to work. You may, like I said, you may know them, but what would it take? And we want that feedback. We want that idea. Developers want that. Home builders want that. That's justification for their investment in our community if we can do that. And also gives you a point that we are working with Indiana Packers on their commuting workforce and how do we get an opportunity to share in their employment base, because we want to provide their workers with an opportunity to work or to live in our community. And I don't know if he'd be willing, I don't even know if he's here, but I got a little stat from them last week. An Indiana Packers employee is 3 times more likely to stay a year there if they live in Carroll County. So the question was, Jake, how do I get more Carroll County residents to work here? Because when they come from Carroll County, they stay. So in lies the conversation about residential development. How do we get places for those folks to live so that they can get a nice job there? I mean, just last week they increased their pay to like $34.50 an hour for electric maintenance. I mean, they are 20% of our employment, and they are going to be an equation in this. So if we're looking at attracting development projects, investors into our community, Indiana Packers will be at the table for that, and they're willing to help us any way they can. So just something like that. I know the schools we've talked to before about getting teachers places to live, getting educators a place to live if they can't in the community, and that's been a problem before. So we're going to go on to the next slide. Bit problematic, this one, some would say. So 36% of our workforce as of 2019 wake up every morning and leave. I did for a long time, obviously, both to Lafayette and Tippecanoe County and Howard County. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So if you know anything about, well, we talk about residential development, our community collects income tax dollars if somebody lives here. So for those folks, wherever they work at, they are earning their dollars outside of our county and bringing those income tax dollars back to Carroll County, which is a good thing. We're okay with that. But it doesn't mean that all our neighbors aren't doing the same thing we're doing tonight, right? So I got we've got colleagues across the state that are waking up every morning saying, 3,000 people wake up in Carroll County every morning and go to Tippecanoe. We're going to build them houses, and it's going to be cheaper to build it, and we can fill them faster, especially if they're doing it right now. So we have to be conscious of our economics to know that this is not sustainable, specifically if we're going to have a housing growth that's going to exceed our partners, considering that Tippecanoe County is a large share of that, and they're building homes at a better rate than we could ever think of. So I don't want, like I said, I don't want to be them, but I don't want them to take opportunity away from us. And so meetings like tonight help establish that, kind of puts the flag in the ground that says we're beginning to have these conversations, and we're going to start building homes as well. And so I am going to go ahead to the next slide. We're going to get to the meat here. Lay of the land with building permits. Now, I vetted this through Cameron. And so all I was trying to do, and so I want to let you guys know right now that the data that's been reported through the APC since 1999 is not the most user-friendly data. So when you get in there and try to extrapolate the stuff out, let this just be an indicator to you that where we've gone for building permits on the left over the last, since 2000 basically. And so there are 2 years that are zero, I think, are non-reporting years. And so I pulled this from the U.S. Census Bureau, and I don't know how they get their information, if I could barely get it. So I can tell you, at least from 2016 on, everything has been tracked pretty well, and they do a really good job in that office to make sure they're reporting everything. And so that's why I wanted to show you on the right the new resident investment. So if you look at Carroll County, from 2016 on, they're around $25 to $22 million average in new residential development. And so what this tells us as an economic development corporation is where our baseline is, right? So if we're going to plan on building homes, I need to know where I'm starting at. So we have this data now. We just put this together. And so now we can say, all right, we're going to really build homes. Are we going to make a difference? Would I like to see that at $30 million? Would I like to see it at $40 million, but still maintain my same amount of permits? That just means we're building bigger homes, higher AV. So there's a lot of nuances to this that we're going to be able to use this data that we've now put together and use it as a benchmark to where we're going. So if we go in 5 years, we have a housing initiative and we're still sitting where we're at, then we need to probably adjust what we're doing. So for you folks in the room that make decisions on taxes, this stuff's important, and we as an organization take it very, very serious, and we know where we're starting from, and we really want to outline the goals on what that looks like. Fortunately for us, the housing market is breaking records, and so it's really difficult to us to project where we might land in this run that we're on right now. I can tell you that I think for the first quarter of 2021, we've pulled more permits in the first quarter and we have in a long time. So that's just merely the market pulling itself through, and we want to help that. So next slide, please. Let's capitalize, leveraging our assets. We have beautiful communities. We have great schools. We're going to leverage those things, no doubt about it. What I asked from you, how do we capitalize? And I've got a helper in here as well. We really need, and this is one thing that I've really noticed since I've gotten here back home, is that we've got to be able to support infrastructure improvement projects for our municipalities. It's something that is so important. Time and time again, we find opportunities that are diffused because there's a lack of infrastructure. And that there's always going to be that, but anytime we can support a legitimate infrastructure project, that's something as the EDC we will always get behind, whether it's long-term planning, and we're not even talking about putting pipes in ground, but just planning infrastructure, or actually going through with a project as well. So Delphi just went through a drinking water project, looking at a wastewater. Florida's doing a wastewater project. We've talked to Burlington. Camden's doing planning for, it's always going to be ongoing. And I encourage you, if you're in this room, then you're a leader, and I encourage you to support projects like that as best you can, so that we can make sure that we're positioned to take advantage. And creating tools to compound growth, and that's the main crux of us today, is what tools do we have, what tools can we use to make sure we're capitalizing all these things. And really for us, it's the partnership that we're going to have with Baker Tilly, and we're going to talk a little bit about the TIF tool that we have already in our community that we've used for a number of years, and how we're going to take brand new legislation and we're going to change the way we use it. I can tell you that there's no doubt that if used the right way and responsible, that we have everything we need in this community to capitalize greatly. And I'm going to introduce Andrew Mauser from Baker Tilly, and he's going to talk a little bit about numbers. So we only had about 30 copies of the pro forma for the TIF. So if you don't have one, I know we're trying to distance each other, but please take a look at it. I can make a copy available to you. So this is really for us hot off the presses, in a sense of what we were able to do is take a hypothetical situation, and we use the town of Flora just by nature. It doesn't matter. 3 parcels, a market rate in housing, and how many houses? I think it was 25, right? So then, and he's going to kind of walk through of if this happens, then what, and what does it mean? And he knows more of those details. So, Andy, you want to?
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for having me here, Jake. I appreciate it. Kind of filling in tonight for Matt Eckerly, who's a partner in our office, who I know has done work in Carroll County for quite some time. Personally, I've done work. Residential TIF has been in place for the last couple of years. I worked on a couple of the first residential TIF areas that were created actually by the city of Warsaw in northern Indiana. They were kind of at the forefront of the residential TIF. And over the last couple of years, I've worked in a number of different communities on either setting up residential TIF areas, helping with the administration of those, or even now just looking at the possibilities of using it. As Jake mentioned, it is a really powerful tool for local local communities, tax increment financing or TIF can be one of the most powerful tools that you have in order to encourage new development. And TIF is a tool that captures growth and assessed value, allows you to capture those dollars and then reinvest those dollars in the community to encourage more growth. For a long time, the state's view was that TIF should always be used to encourage commercial and industrial growth. And then, once the jobs and, those structures were in place, that the homes would follow. And then I think, over the time, they saw that, eventually the jobs were there, but, housing stocks in a lot of communities were really lagging. So that's been a challenge. And finally, in 2018, 2019, there was enough momentum to pass the residential or housing TIF legislation. And that's been in place over the last couple of years with a number of changes that were made in 2020. But it's, as Jake mentioned, local income tax is a really powerful tool within the state as well, and local income tax is distributed not where it works, but where it sleeps. So, if you're a resident of Carroll County, even if you're working in one of those donut counties or either further out in the state, your local income tax is going to be paid and reinvested here. So it's important to have those homes, make sure you're keeping people here and keeping those dollars reinvested. So that's been a big use of the tool. And as Jake mentioned too, a lot of times with new housing development, it's not occurring not because there's not developers out there looking, but because there are those gaps on infrastructure. We want to put in 25, 50 homes, but we need water, sewer, roads in place. How do we make that happen? And for a long time, there just hasn't been that financing tool in order to do that. So we are a CPA firm. We did put together some pretty detailed numbers, which I think may be up on the screen, and then Shannon did pass around copies as well. So I'll try not to get too much into the numbers, but I think those can kind of help illustrate what a powerful tool residential TIF can be as well. Very similar tool if you're familiar with traditional TIF. It works in a lot of the same ways. Really the one difference is that it can capture single family homes. So where traditional TIF is pretty much commercial industrial property only, residential TIF can capture both of those, but then also single family homes as well. And there are a few nuances to it. I think especially with the change, one of the goals of the state was to make sure there was good transparency. So there is an eligibility test that the community would have to meet depending on which township that residential TIF area would be located in. And then there is actually a direct approval that would have to be made by the school corporation or school corporations that would overlap that residential TIF area. And then there are requirements for public meetings with any affected neighborhood associations as well. So kind of the same process that a traditional TIF area would go through. It would go through redevelopment commission, plan commission, county council, back to the redevelopment commission with public meetings along the way, notification of all the overlapping taxing units. It has all those same requirements. But then on top of that, like I said, also has that direct approval from the schools and then that engagement with the neighborhood associations, if there are any as well. So I think to that extent, like I said, it tends to be more transparent than what you see with traditional TIF, but in a lot of ways it is a very similar tool. So I can kind of go through these numbers quickly, and like I said, I'll try and kind of highlight some of the main takeaways, maybe more so than the actual numbers themselves. We did put together an illustrative, development, assuming 25 new homes built within Flora, and we've assumed, that would be a development that would be phased in over the course of 5 years, for example. So in this case, you can see, looking at page 2 of our numbers, we've assumed homes ranging from $225,000, and typically in Indiana, homes are capped at the 1%, assuming they are primary residences. So a $225,000 home is going to pay just over $2,250 in annual taxes. A $275,000 home would be right around $2,750. So you can see the kind of the phase in as that development would occur. By the time you get to full build out, you're talking 25 homes ranging from $225,000 to $275,000, a total assessed value impact of about $6.1 million. So fairly significant addition, to the tax base that would be captured as tax increment during that TIF capture period. Homesteads, homeowners in Indiana do receive the standard deduction, supplemental homestead deduction, and mortgage deduction. So the actual taxable value of a development like that's about $3.2 million. The $3.2 million in taxable assessed value would generate about $65,000 a year. So just to get an idea, a 25 home new subdivision, for example, that would be built, you're talking about $65,000 per year that could be captured as TIF. Residential TIF does have a 25-year eligibility for capture, and that 25 years doesn't start until you would issue any bonds or leases in order to fund infrastructure with that tax increment revenue. So that's kind of your maximum term that you could capture those TIF dollars. There really is no minimum. So, doing the math here, that $65,000, if you were to take that over 25 years and account for those first few years of phase-in, that's about a $1.5 million revenue stream available to the county just from those 25 homes. So that's money that can then be reinvested back into the infrastructure that would be required to, get those homes there in the first place. So you're talking roads, sewer extensions, things like that. To the extent maybe the infrastructure needs for that 25 home development are only $500,000, then maybe you would only need to capture that TIF for 8 or 10 years. So TIF gives you the flexibility that you can capture that for the full length if you need to, and if you don't, you can certainly capture it and then in that TIF area and get that assessed value back to the tax base as soon as possible. So like I said, TIF really gives you, I think more than anything, flexibility. If once that TIF area is established and you're collecting those dollars, even if you're done, with the funding of those needs that you had up front, you could always look to continue to leverage the TIF to continue infrastructure improvements and continue to, build out housing in the future. You could pass through some of those dollars to overlapping taxing units. And like I said, you could also end that TIF area early. So it really does give you quite a bit of flexibility there. Flip quickly to page 3. Trying to illustrate here, a question we get asked a lot of times is, what does tax increment take away from the overlapping taxing units? And so what we've shown here, if you can see, is kind of a breakdown. Obviously, a homeowner within Flora would pay the Flora tax rate, but that is going to consist of the county, the township, the town, the school, and the library. So all those units have their property tax levies that obtain a piece of that each tax bill. By capturing it as TIF, that $3.2 million is going to generate about $66,000, as we mentioned, per year in annual tax increment. If those same dollars weren't captured and instead were allowed to flow through the tax to the overlapping tax base, the overlapping tax base is actually constrained by a maximum levy. So the schools can only levy a certain amount each year. The county can only levy a certain amount each year. So by actually adding that assessed value to the tax base, those units aren't necessarily going to see additional dollars. What it's going to help do is bring down tax rates. And so what that can do, obviously, is provide some relief to taxpayers. It can reduce circuit breaker losses for those units. But when you're talking, a capture of $66,000 a year, by the time you factor in the spread of those dollars across all the taxpayers in the county and all the other taxing units, the impact of the TIF typically is pretty minor on all those units. And again, they are constrained by that maximum levy constraint. So those units are not necessarily losing dollars, but again, it's allowing the TIF to capture those and then reinvest in the infrastructure needed to fund that development in the first place. The last slide, and I think that's kind of the numbers that are up on the screen. As I mentioned, traditionally with TIF, the idea has been to, have TIF encourage commercial industrial development, and then, where you may be giving away some of that property tax benefit through the tax increment financing. The idea is that you're adding jobs, you're adding wages, you're increasing spending in your community, you're getting those local income tax benefits. So even though, the property tax side is somewhat limited by the TIF, all those other pieces is where the county's really going to see benefit. With residential TIF, there's really another component to that, and that is the school tuition support. So if these are new homes and are attracting new residents to Carroll County, we've shown that, if that 25 home development brought in 15 new students to the county, the schools are going to see about $6,000 per student. So, 15 students, $6,000 a year per each student. That's a $90,000 annual impact to the schools. So when you kind of compare that to, the TIF piece, $60-some thousand to put in that infrastructure to get that development in the first place, that impact to the schools just from tuition support alone can exceed that property tax kind of cost to it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions with that, but kind of wanted to just go through some of those numbers and highlight some of the other benefits that we typically see with the residential TIF areas.
All right, so we'll try to wake everybody up. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I want to use some real world scenario with this, right? So why is a tool like this and why our community? It's a unique situation in working with the County Redevelopment Commission that they have done really well. They're very frugal with the tax dollars, and they have a great base to start with. So when we talk about financing from the TIF aspect, we want to be able to leverage our capital in the community that we have already to help these developments materialize. And that's where I think from the tax side is our goal with the TIF, and it could be in a myriad of different ways before we actually get to the final point. But our goal is to not use the residential TIF areas within our communities as a place that they're going to reside forever. Our goal is to take these housing TIFs, the residential TIF, allocate some areas that we feel that are going to be high investment areas or that have already been identified as investment areas, and then leverage our resources from our County Redevelopment Commission to help support those projects. So I want to, before I move on, I would like to open the floor since we have numbers here, and I want to make sure that if there's questions about the specific rate, where the dollars are going, how are they going, I want to go ahead and talk about those now. So do we have a mic that, yeah. Is there one up there? All right, I'm going to walk this around because I knew that we wouldn't get up to the microphone and talk. Does anybody have a question? Because right off the get-go, that we can kind of address since we're here and Baker Tilly's here and the numbers. Yep, Mayor Worley. Okay, yep, great.
That's a good question. The question was about the but-for test with tax increment, and that is one of the required findings on traditional TIF areas as well, is that the new development wouldn't be occurring but for the tax increment. So you need to be, the Redevelopment Commission, in order to set up a traditional TIF area, would have to make the finding that those TIF dollars are needed in order to make that investment happen in the first place. And a lot of that kind of goes back to the conversation about the gap we see with developers a lot of times. They are interested in building, those subdivisions, putting in new homes, but a lot of times there is that gap on the infrastructure needs and how do we fund those. So the same requirements is in place with residential TIF as well. The Redevelopment Commission would make that same but-for test, stating that residential development is not going to occur but for those TIF dollars that are then reinvested into the infrastructure to encourage that development in the first place. So.
Thank you. Any questions from that?
Yes, Kirk Schwarzkopf, and I actually is on the school, Delphi School Board, and I think it'd probably speak to both schools. I understand the TIF and the money that a kid will bring to our school, but my question is beyond that. One thing that we look at, and whether it's Carroll or Delphi, we need to make sure our class sizes are lower than somebody in Lafayette to attract people in, right? Because those who want a class, we'll just say, of elementary 20 and under in every class, we know that they increase their knowledge, they do so much better versus 27. What is it that the TIF can do for us to help us keep those down? Because there is money coming into TIF. It's kind of a chicken and the egg, I know, but if we're going to develop housing and those people sit there and say, whoa, I want my kid to reside here, right? I'll go ahead and work in Lafayette. So what is there or thought process has been done to help us? And it could even be in infrastructure, right, as we grow. There's a few things that may need to be done. Adding 15 kids don't seem like a lot, but it is. I mean, if you really want to look at a kid, right, if we can get them at an early age, kindergarten up, time it gets through, about $1 million, right? So when you look at that stage, what is it in there for us to look at or to maybe not count on? But the state eventually is going to reduce our funding. We know that. I mean, we can't sustain what we're currently doing. So what is there potentially in place for us?
Yeah, I think to get on that topic, with the TIF, I think we have to be as unconventional thinking as possible. So when we put our deal together, when we put this together and it's the school board's approval, I think we need to talk about ways that we can channel back some of that funding to make sure our schools are satisfied with the agreement. So I don't want to speak in generalization because we don't know what it'll look like, but I think if we are going to leverage public dollars, there needs to be rules and language in place to make sure that that the schools are aware of what's going on and have access to that. So I think the goal is, and it's been stated a few times, that we don't, when we develop, if there's an area that does develop, when it's done and there's no debt on that property, we don't want the TIF hanging over that allocation area anymore. Give that back to its taxing entities. There's no reason. The goal of putting the TIF in place is to leverage that cash and then give it back as soon as possible to the taxing entity. So if we felt like there was constraints between, we're starting to see an influx of students or we're starting to see a little bit of that happen, how do we leverage what is currently being brought back into that TIF and giving it back to the schools so that they can make their proper adjustments? Does that make sense? So I think we would be remiss to think that we are just going to increase our student size and not give the schools an opportunity to have access to those funds that are part of that growth. So I would want to be a part of that. So, yep.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. That's kind of the same concerns we've seen in a lot of communities. Is $6,000 is enough to pay an extra teacher, but what if we need to add classrooms, things like that. One thing I might add, and I think Jake hit on a lot of it, but with traditional TIF, there's a 15% rule, so you can actually use 15% on an annual basis of your TIF dollars directly for school improvements. That can be your local schools, that can be higher education institutions, Ivy Tech, things like that. And that can either be capital improvements, or that can be even things like work training programs. There's some limitations because TIF typically is meant for capital expenditures, but like I said, even work training programs, things like that, it can be used for. So that's where I think the partnership comes into play. And if, the redevelopment commission can help put a new roof on an elementary school, and then that gives you more dollars to, expand into a couple additional classrooms, something like that, then, that's really the win-win and where the TIF can help directly. But then, a lot of it too is just building tax base and making sure that the schools do have, that tax base within 5, 10, 15, 20 years to, continue to raise funds for improvements.
Yeah, I see a scenario where, and there's tons that could play out here, and I think we've got to be conscious of them all, is that if we use any redevelopment commission dollars to assist in an infrastructure improvement for a housing development, that once the redevelopment commission has been made whole, that even if that subdivision has not been filled yet, that any future growth from that subdivision, because the infrastructure's already been done and spoken for, that any new growth is coming right back to the political subdivision. So there are certain scenarios that we want to make sure. Obviously, if we're leveraging public dollars in this scenario, that we want to make sure that development projects have timelines and a pace that they need to achieve. So we're not going to extend ourselves and our capital for a development project that's going to fall behind timeline, and then we're dragging the TIF out longer than we want to. And so the goal would be that we are in a position to work with a development project to get them down the road as quickly as possible, so we can realize those revenues back quickly, and we're not just waiting. So, questions, others? Mr. Bradshaw?
Dick Bradshaw with the Carroll County Chamber. How much cross spending can go between TIFs? In other words, we have several TIFs in Carroll County right now. Can others support this by infrastructure? How much money can be passed between them, so on and so forth? Or is it simply the residential TIF that can be used for the residential promotion?
Yeah, I think, and you might have to help me on this. If we are establishing residential TIF, or what they call HOTIFs, the housing TIFs, then they will draw, and the convening authority will be the County Redevelopment Commission as we sit now. And so they will be able to use funds that are in the redevelopment coffers that is in the TIF allocation area that we currently have as a county, and they'll be able to use that in the parcels that are in the Flora proper, or the Camden proper, or the other side of Delphi, or even in Delphi if they want to. So now the political subdivisions that are tied to those designated parcels have to approve that in order for the Redevelopment Commission to kind of have access to that. Is that a fair, and maybe you have a better explanation?
No, that's all. No, that's all true. One of the additional things I might add would be, with TIF, there is an in-serving and benefiting test. So any TIF dollars have to be spent either directly in the geographic boundaries of that TIF area or serving and benefiting, which can be a little bit more of a gray area. But that's typically, if you have a major road running through that TIF area, that would be, improvements that would be serving and benefiting. So as long as your TIF areas remain independent TIF areas, you'd be really constrained to keep those dollars within the TIF area. You could have flexibility in the future if you wanted to combine or consolidated TIF areas, but that would all go through a completely separate public approval process before those TIF areas could ever be consolidated and those dollars spent across boundaries. So, those dollars would kind of stay within their own little pockets.
To answer your question, Mr. Bradshaw. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
On the $22 million new investment that you've seen historically, is that primarily been business or residential? What was that? I guess that leaked up pretty quick on me and I didn't catch that.
No problem. So that would be, as indicated by the builder, new residence investment, just homes. So when you fill out your form, I just did this, I put what my house would be worth now, whether it be close or whatever. But so that's self-reported, and they tend to be, that was what I was looking for, is just statistical trends. There could have been nothing, but it seemed that was the number that we were hovering around on a year-over-year basis for new resident builds permits. So. Yes, $22 million in real cash has been spent on building new homes in our community. Yeah, so it's not bleak. Our community has done well. I think that we've got to look at different strategies, different tools that our state legislature has given us to make sure that we're not being left behind. And I think just showing you what's going on around us should be a good indicator on some of the tools we need to kick into place to make sure we're competitive. So, yeah, good question, definitely. Yep.
Larry with RDC, Larry Trapp, Redevelopment Commission. Can you go through the timeline or the basis of how this residential TIF will work? Because I'm understanding that the school board
I don't know about final say. Would you, maybe the regulatory piece of the steps on, and maybe you have to give a hypothetical of Flora. So what would that maybe look like for that scenario?
Sure. So it would go through that typical redevelopment commission process. So it goes redevelopment commission, then the plan commission, then the county council, and then back to the redevelopment commission. And the school board approval, I know has to go somewhere in that process before it comes back to the redevelopment commission. I'm not sure if the order of that matters for sure. That's something I know the attorneys would probably know right off the top of their head, but the redevelopment commission, yeah, it's kind of that four-step process, starting and ending with the redevelopment commission, just adding that school board approval kind of in the middle of it.
So yeah, they'll have to be in the hopper, but I think the answer is, and that's informative for me, so the answer is, starts at the RDC, and then we end up back at the RDC for approval once everything has been balanced. I joked. I said if I could have it tomorrow, I would. If we felt like this was something the community wanted to go with. Obviously, we've got to build consensus. We still have concerns that we want to hear because they're there, and make sure that we're addressing them. So yeah, I think we talked with the attorneys. We could go as fast as 90 days. So if we were ready to go and the Redevelopment Commission was ready to kick this off next month, if everything goes well, then yeah, I think within 90 days we'd have resolutions and be moving ahead. Ideally. So does that answer your question? Is that fair? How long did what were their time cycles like? 90 days, 120?
The whole process was probably, 90 days or a little bit more. The actual legal steps were probably a month or two of that process. A lot of kind of educating the other units and getting people on board. So, I think that's very fair.
Cameron? It's done. Yeah. So we every political subdivision has to approve. And being that the example we used with Flora, the town of Flora is going to have to be involved as well. So they're going to have their own questions, whether they're here or not tonight. We're going to continue to have those conversations openly with them. And so I encourage you, if you're here tonight and you're part of a political subdivision that's interested in participating, that you talk with your counterparts in the public meetings moving up to it. And then we can have conversations in whatever order you guys want. But yeah, great question. I mean, if not everybody wants to participate, it really just sours the deal. And so the goal is to build as much consensus. There will be people inherently that possibly just don't want it. And that's absolutely fine, but that's why we do what we do, to vet the process and make sure that all the information is on the table, like starting with tonight. So yeah, I think each scenario we're looking at with residential TIF is going to take a different shape. So if we're looking at using an area that is not within a municipal proper, then we don't have to worry about City of Delphi. And I say don't worry about, but it'll just be one less step we have to take for approval. It's just be the county council, correct? On that, the commissioners as well.
Correct.
So
yeah.
executive, legislative on those pieces. So, and then once we get into the communities, that'll be obviously important for those political subdivisions to approve. So, really, really, really good questions. Yeah, Mr. Bradshaw.
I commend you for having a meeting like this. I think this is what we need a lot more of. But many people see TIFs as voodoo economics. They don't understand how you can create money out of nothing without taking it away from somebody else. And I'm sure that school boards and other governmental units are worried about that because that is their lifeblood. What's the plan to, quote, sell this whole project? And I know you've sold some TIFs already. But what's the plan to do that, and how are you going to proceed?
Yeah, I think for me, it really starts with the schools. I know that the political subdivisions are obviously important as well, but I think our kiddos are really premised to this and their future in the community. And so to answer your question, to outright plan would be to make sure that this is a non-issue if the Delphi and the Carroll schools are not willing to entertain this. That's the way we're proceeding, because this would be the basis of that. And then after that, we can work through the other political subdivisions. So the plan is to make sure that our school systems are on board with us identifying potential lands for development, creating a TIF allocation area, and then we're going to return, Mr. Bradshaw, the goal is to return those taxing allocation areas, those TIF allocation areas. Our goal is to return those back to the taxing unit, fully developed, ready to go. So then if whether it's a release of funds because they've been withholding it due to debt obligated on the property, or we're doing it because we don't need to leverage any capital and it's just going to grow and return back to the school from the kickoff. So I think the plan is to sell it in whatever model best fits the school, and then try to proceed from there. Good question. Yeah, so great question, Mayor Whirling. So the question is, for everybody over here, is if Delphi were to establish one and not be associated with the county's redevelopment commission. Yeah, so if it was, the ideal part of using the county redevelopment commission for residential TIF is because they have capital, and we don't want to pull that capital strain from the operating budget of our political subdivisions. So the goal is, and I'll get to your question, but the goal is that we want to build a housing addition in an area where the landowners are agreeing that they would like it to be developed. They're being reasonable about it. We have developers, we have a need, we have all the things to make a project happen, but we don't want the taxing entity, or in this case, the town of Flora or Burlington or Camden, to debt overlay an infrastructure project for 25 homes, or have to service that debt themselves, or there's just not enough revenue inside the TIF to be able to do that. So using the county's current funding to do that and not taking away from our political subdivisions, that's kind of, Mr. Bradshaw, back to that. That's the sell, is that we're going to be able to work projects in your community, and we don't even want to touch your current operating budget. We don't want you to incur any more debt. Keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to help you out. I think that is the goal by using the county redevelopment. To get to Mayor Whirling's point, TIFs have to grow. So in the case of when you have a TIF that doesn't have capital, there has to be a point that the schools are okay with an organic growing residential TIF, which means that if they have a ability to start a development, that that TIF allocation may have to reside longer in order for it to pay itself back because of the growth that's got to happen within that TIF. So. Right, and in that case, with the Delphi, if that happens in Delphi, which would be a great model, is the fact that even if there's debt being serviced on that TIF allocation area, the schools, as Andrew was saying, like the schools are going to see the tax benefits on the income side and the butts and seats far more than they would ever realize from the property tax income on that anyway. So. I see it working both ways very fluently for the city of Delphi if that's the route we go, because like I said, the advantage, and we indicated the numbers, the advantages are on the income tax side and the actual head count side more than it is the property tax side ever. So that's where that model fits the Delphi schools, and maybe would be different if the county was using their own, or if Flora wanted to do their own, that would be that case. So hopefully I was able to explain. That's a great question. Yeah, both models work, whether it's the county or the TIF itself, the Delphi TIF actually doing their own residential. They would have, same rules would apply. It's just the organic growth would come from a different location. Any other questions? That was a challenging question, actually, but thank you. It's about 25 to 30, yeah. So to establish the TIF for the parcels identified, it's about $30,000 to get the attorneys and these folks and everybody engaged. What we can do as a community is as we go back to our homes, we can identify areas where we feel that there could be residential development. Or if you're a landowner that has a great opportunity to develop homes on an area that you're wanting to develop, then that's something that we would want to know. And our goal, Larry, is to package all of those parcels, run the financial analysis that you see here for Flora for all those parcels, and run through and allocate those areas in one foul swoop. So we're only paying $30,000 as a community to establish these 10 or 12 different parcels. I think I sent them 12 originally, and they're like, yeah, let's reel this back a little bit. So just for the example. And so yes, my goal is to get this done if there's a consensus on it, Larry, and do it in one movement, and then it's funded by one mechanism. That would be the goal. Now, each TIF that we do find and identify, a couple things I'm worried about is, one, I want to make sure the landowners of those parcels are okay with that, right? Like, it doesn't affect their taxes, but we as a community have identified that, and we want them to be understanding that, yes, that my area, that this land could be developed, and that I'm opening the door for developers to come talk to me about what it could look like. So our goal isn't to just throw these parcels out to your community and say, that's the area, and that's the area, all knowing, but merely being strategic in what land is available and how can we best use it for this process. So there's already been some. The reference one here in Flora, the landowners are ready to sell the property to a developer so they can begin to contribute to their community by building homes. And so that's why we're able to use that specific example. And we want to do that, Larry, for all the areas that we want to look at. And I guess we will know once the conversations are on how many parcels that really is. And then that would kind of relay back to the school on what that total impact is going to be. And can we let those TIF allocation areas go back one by one? Or is that an attorney question?
As far as the expirations?
Yes.
Yes.
Or just actually holding back the TIF allocations? Or can we return those back to the political subdivision by choice?
Yeah, you'd have a maximum 25 years on each of them,
one?
but you
Okay.
could, hold 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 15, and let one go the full 25 years. There's no reason they would have to, all go that full 25 years.
Yeah, so if we have a identified property that wasn't going to be developed, but we'd identified it originally, we can that won't be out. It'll be known as a TIF allocation area, but there won't be any funds being held back. So each political subdivision would get their funding for that property, but it would still be counted as an economic development area, right? So if we ever wanted to flip the switch and the school was on board with it, then we do that and we develop that area. So at least for the life of the issuance. So great question. Yeah.
Andrew, so you're thinking that the entities that create the TIF, let's say we want 5 of them, they're going to do it for 30,000 and not 150,000?
So each area that's identified, the cost will only be realized by the redevelopment commission that's issuing those allocation areas. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I was speaking.
Legal work to be involved in each of the parcels that you choose.
Correct.
I don't know that 30,000 is going to cover the establishment of 5 separate residential TIF areas in the county. Is that true?
I think we can do that. Yeah. So we would do all the financial analysis and attorney work for all the parcels at the same time. So we could do all 5 of them in 90 days. Realistically, probably more like 6 months, but. Yeah.
I guess each of those areas would still operate as an independent allocation area. So you could do that process for all 5 at the same time, and there would be certainly efficiencies to doing so. You're only holding one public redevelopment commission meeting, one plan commission meeting, one council meeting. So there are quite a few efficiencies on the professional side for setting those up. But then once set up, I mean, if those are 5 separate allocation areas kind of scattered around the county, they would operate as individual allocation areas that would have their limitations, to those dollars being spent within each of those areas. Does that answer? Okay.
I think they would all, yeah. The monetary gain from those would revert back to the redevelopment commission that established it, no matter how broad. So, yeah. The work really in that is the attorney work tying those areas back to the redevelopment commission. So how do we clearly define why we need to be in Camden, and what does that have to do with the Indiana Packers TIF, as we call it, or the county? What does that mean? And so Barnes and Thornburg has indicated that they're able to do that, and that's what the language the state legislature allowed us to do, is that, that residential TIF area is going to build homes for workers within that county redevelopment area. And so as we put jobs in that redevelopment area, there are going to ever be more expanding needs for housing in those other areas as well. So I think Yep, that's what ties it all together. Yep, and that's why Indiana Packers, I mentioned that from the beginning, as really over the last couple weeks even have come aboard and are going to provide some great data on their workers and what they're looking for and the housing needs. So if you're a developer and I can show you that I've got a need of 600 people that said they will live in Carroll County if they were provided housing, then that just further bolsters our ability to build the right houses and get the right people to the table. So, yep. The goal, tie those to the TIF area, the actual original redevelopment commission, and then try to grow from there. Yes, sir. Essentially just provide the funding, correct?
Sure. I mean, there's lots of different ways that TIF can be used. We talked a little bit, Carroll County is unique with the Indiana Packer dollars. I mean, you do have existing TIF balances that are available for some of those improvements that a lot of counties, a lot of cities and towns just don't have, pots of money kind of sitting around waiting, to be used on infrastructure. But, a lot of communities are setting up these TIF areas and then immediately, we talked about here, that $60,000 a year is a $1.5 million revenue stream over 25 years. So that's something you could leverage, bond against, and there's different ways to structure those. But that's what a lot of communities are having to do is, we have that $1.5 million revenue stream over 25 years. We're going to go to a local bank or we're going to go out to the bond market. And, the difficulty with that is that $1.5 million may only generate, $500,000, $600,000. So that's where Carroll County really, I think, has an advantage here with having those dollars that, you could use TIF almost like a reimbursement mechanism, and you're not leveraging those and tying them up for 25 years.
That's a great question. So we're going to see different models and makes of this as we begin to grow and get our wings out on this. It's going to take different shapes, as Mayor Whirling pointed out. I mean, Delphi may do something different. Doesn't make it bad or worse. It's just going to be a different mechanism and a way to grow housing. And so, yeah, with the capital we currently have, that's enticing, and we want to leverage that. I don't think there's never a goal on this to subsidize, right? So we don't want dollars going into developers' hands necessarily, but we want to de-risk projects. We want to be able to say we have the capital, interest-free, and we want you to be able to do what you need to do to get the project across the line, because inherently they can build the same amount of homes right down the road. You guys have seen it tonight just as much as I have, and there's a lot less risk and a lot more capital. And so how do we get ourselves to the table by utilizing the capital that we do have and de-risking those projects to build homes here? Yeah, that's a great question, and that's probably something that needs to be further vetted out. I think we've got to look at with our financial expertise on what that revenue would be. So I think, Joe, in this case where we're sitting right now, if we're extending public dollars as debt, in this case, if we do that, there needs to be enough revenue in that TIF to be able to pay it back if the developer folds over. So we don't want to be in a scenario where we've got $300,000 debt overlay and the developer walks away and the RDC says, whoa, 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 we've got skin in the game here. Well, they use the TIF allocation area to pay themselves back until they're made whole, and then they can release that TIF allocation back. So it's a way, it's a mechanism for us to make sure. So I think that the sweet spot has to be based upon how much need is there for them to get their project through. And then at that point, that would be the difference. Yeah, I think we have to determine how much the development project needs from the community to be able to make it realize itself, and then measure that. So could be 10 homes, could be 15, could be 25, depending on streets, sidewalks, sewers, water, drinking water, things like that. Some of the main infrastructure stuff that may be needed in their case or that they want to utilize. So. Great question.
Yeah, great question there. Yeah, the residential TIF areas can capture everything that traditional TIF can. So the commercial, industrial property. So the extent you had, retail mixed in the neighborhood, something like that, it would capture those. You just have those additional requirements to be able to capture both, be able to capture the residential and then also what you're capturing with the traditional TIF areas.
Yeah, we won't ignore, the goal would be not to ignore those things at all. All right, for the sake of time, we have hit an hour and 7 minutes. So I want to kind of get through the rest of the slides, if you don't mind. It's just a few more. No more numbers, I don't think. Yeah, Larry, go ahead. Yes. Yep. So I think that we would want to vet those through the political subdivisions that we're passing it through ahead of time. So if it's something that, I want to be made whole, or I want it 10 years or 5 years. Yeah. So those can all be baked into the legal agreement. And then we, as the Economic Development Corporation, kind of go to the table with the school and say, hey, the RDC is saying this, and can we work out a deal that fits that? And then we go to the political subdivision and say, is this okay with you? So, yes, I think that's why I want to use a blanket template tonight, but I want everybody to be open-minded that they're going to look different, sound different. They may take different shape than even we talked about tonight, but the goal is that we have a baseline on what we're trying to get accomplished. So, great question. So what can we all do to help? I think the first thing is, and I'll always give a quick plug for this, is that help us identify property for development. We try every day to try to uncover property that is potential for development, but we don't always end up in the right place. We want to use your help in identifying that. 2, be aware of market trends, multifamily, single family, et cetera. You might see some unconventional multifamily that we've never seen in our community before. Be open to that. Ask questions. Be at the table, because I have a regulatory process in place to help us with that. But we need to also be understanding of what young families are looking for these days. What kind of housing do they want? What size of lots? Because they're not what you see. They're not what I see. So be aware of those so that we can talk about those constructively when investment projects come to our community. You could still, so basically with that, just be open-minded. Communicate openly and often with your elected officials, right? So like I said, we contract economic development services for the taxing entities, the towns and the county. You voice your opinion to them, that gets to us and allows us to do a better job. So make sure we're doing that. And then the final thing is share your vision. I really want you to focus on what you see growth looks like, what you see and how you see it. Share that with folks. We want to be able to talk about what Delphi, Flora, Camden, Burlington, Carroll County, we want to talk about what that looks like. And if we're not, we're going to get an unexpected situation that we may not be comfortable with. So please, we're always available, a phone call away. And next slide. I know I had a lot of questions. Got any to wrap up? Randy?
I don't want to make it sound like we're very needy here and trying to find the first piece of property that comes up. My concern is that are we going to be following comprehensive land use plans and not just somebody wants to sell and we're going to stick 25 or 30 homes in the middle of someplace where they're not supposed to be? Where's that going to be as a priority to this whole thing?
It's a great question. Number one priority. So the reason we want to convene these conversations with land use is because we'd like to think that we could help development projects understand and realize the nature of what's going on around them. So we may know about a project that you don't know about, and we want to make sure that we're not building a subdivision right in front of a commercial use project that is coming through or potentially in place. And so to your point is utilizing the Economic Development Corporation for that information helps us better utilize land. Two is for 2022 and beyond, I think even this year, we're going to encourage all our communities to do comprehensive planning. That has to be to the forefront every time. And we've seen great success from planning. 3 years ago, Flora went and got a fully engineered broadband plan, and it sat on the desk for 2 years, and now it's coming to fruition, and we're starting to see movement on that. And so if we can plan and use our community's comprehensive plan to do that, Randy, I think we're going to see success in that. So, I would look for a fully comprehensive plan for the county and the EDC trying to pull all the communities together. But for this specific initiative right here, right now, we've got to make sure we're aware what our neighbors are doing so we're not misusing land and really just creating a situation where we're devaluing opportunity because of development. So that's a great question. We are conscious of that. Any others? Okay, well, I want to thank the Delphi United Methodist Church for hosting us. I want to thank you. I appreciate your time. I'm always a phone call away, and I can guarantee you this conversation will be had more over again, and we welcome your input. Thank you for your time.